What is going on, everyone? Anthony here, and welcome back to another video here on LTRE. And today we're talking a little bit more about the survival horror topic that we talked about in the last video, discussing dead IPs, dead survival horror games, what's successful, what isn't successful, and it's been great to hear your responses. Now, shortly after that video, Glen Schofield himself actually did an interview and talked about the Callisto Protocol, which is one of the games I brought up in the last video I made, which, again, I was a fan of that game. I didn't play the DLC yet, but I plan on streaming that and finishing it soon. But I think a lot of people wanted to know what exactly happened to cause this game to be, rushed out the door, so to speak, because he's pretty much saying that Krafton was forcing them to ship it early. And let's read this article here. Now, this is from Bloody Disgusting, but obviously all of the articles have been picking this up, talking about it the last few days, so I wanted to chime in on my thoughts, and here's what he had to say. What happened to Striking Distance Studios' The Callisto Protocol? The spiritual successor to Dead Space launched in an apparent unpolished state, with performance issues on PC and poor execution in several gameplay areas. This result had the game scoring mixed reviews, publisher Krafton immensely scaling back sales projections, and eventually had Striking Distance Studios CEO Glen Schofield leaving the developer. And in a recent interview with PC Games, Schofield confirmed those suspicions regarding the release of the Callisto Protocol in a bit of a post-mortem, stating that Krafton had pushed the game out too soon. In the interview, Schofield claimed that initially Striking Distance was given a lot of leeway when it came to developing the Callisto Protocol. However, Krafton later insisted on a December 2022 release. I wanted about 3.5 months of development time, said Schofield, who says that he was led to believe that Krafton agreed to the request. In October or September of 21, I was told you're going to get the time, put whatever you want into the game. So I spent that Christmas holiday just designing and coming up with the ideas with some of the guys, and then January comes around and some of the Krafton folks came over and said, no, it's December 2022. Schofield stated that in a response to December release date, he stated that the team would have to accelerate everything by 3.5 months, which also required more developers to join the project. Complicating matters was the COVID pandemic, as well as the mass resignations that were going on in the industry as a result. So to pause real quick, this is a perfect example, a perfect storm, if you will, of a publisher kind of hunkering down on the development team saying, listen, I know what we said back there, but we need to hit these sales expectations because maybe they didn't hit them the previous year, and they were trying to really get them to amp it up, get this thing done so they can hit those goals, hit those, sales goals, hit the profits that they needed for that quarter. And this happens way too often. I think sometimes there is a case of misunderstanding when things actually need to get done, but also when there's miscommunication between the publisher and the developer, this causes issues. I mean, it looks like he could have took that last bit of the year to actually push the development time instead of designing different ideas and different enemy designs. And instead of developing during that time because he thought that he had the time, by the beginning of 22, it looks like they were just like, nope, needs to be done by December. So he had to push everything. And we did go through a pandemic, so I get that it is a very crucial element here to this development because this was being made during that time. It's really hard for people to use that excuse nowadays when it comes to developing because everything is kind of back into the swing of things. Some people still work from home, yes, but a lot of times when they do need people to come into the studio, they do just that, or they continue to work from home if the company gives them an option. So I'm not going to say that this is a lame excuse for this guy to say, listen, we had people that were not able to come in or they were sick. He's about to get into more of that up and coming. But at the same time, Krafton was like, we don't care. We want this thing out. So it comes to show that even with the sympathy that they might have showed, they still didn't really care. They didn't really show much sympathy at all because they were just like, yeah, guess what? Oh, well, it still needs to be out by December 22. We have to hit this deadline. We have to hit our sales goals because the projected sales were kind of reeled back in when they realized it wasn't moving product as much as they would have liked. So there's that. But let's see what else he has to say. You have a studio of 200 people. 10 to 20 people a month were getting sick, and they were getting sick for weeks. We were devastated. And then on top of that, in 21, we had the Great Resignation. 49 people quit because everybody's paying through the roof, and so people are leaving for $10,000 more. As a result, Striking Distance had to cut 4 bosses and 2 enemy types because of the crunch. When asked if he would have done anything different during production, Schofield says that he would have been more firm about the release date. I would have put my foot down. I'm not shipping it, saying if you want the game to ship, you come and take over the studio. It is interesting to see that he is saying that he would have been more firm about it. I mean, I would have been bitching to Krafton, basically saying, listen, it's not shipping by December. It's not shipping by December. We don't have the people. There's 20, 40, 60 people out like that are constantly sick on rotation. Who's sick, who isn't sick, right? Then he says that there was 49 people that quit because they were looking for more money and so on and so forth. And I'm sure this did happen within many development circles and teams and movie productions and all forms of media. So you would think that Krafton would have had a little bit more sympathy, but no, they were just like, we need to ship this thing. And unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of the times with these publishers, developers. Sometimes they do get greedy and they don't really consider what is actually going on here. It's saying they had to cut a couple bosses and enemy designs, right? That would have been really cool to see in the DLC. I don't know if there's, I'm sure there's some new designs we see in the DLC. I haven't played it yet, so excuse my, lack of knowledge, right? I just didn't play it. I own it. I paid for it. Just haven't streamed it yet. But that would have been a good time for them to throw that in the DLC. And maybe they did. I don't know. Or maybe the designs they put in were just specifically for the DLC. All I know is that the DLC, because they knew they were closing and wrapping up shop with Callisto, they essentially made a definitive ending for the DLC because they knew that they were pretty much done. And that's sad because I think this game had great potential. It wasn't trying to be Dead Space. It was just trying to do something else. I like the melee combat. I actually was getting a hang of it by the time I beat it 3 times. You know what I mean? I really enjoyed when they did update it because it did actually add to the experience. There was less frame rate dips. There was less bugs. A lot of the combat stuff was improved. The healing times, the different weapons that you get apparently in the DLC are actually really good. A lot of people were praising the DLC, but it's too little too late. It was a crappy time in our industry as a whole. We just dealt with the pandemic and it was a very tough time. So I don't want to say, oh, you can't use that as an excuse. If a studio used that now as an excuse, it kind of wouldn't work, right? Because a lot of times people can work from home now, and if they need to come into the studio, they come into the studio. But during the peak of development, yeah, I'm sure it was during that time where people were in and out of work and so on and so forth. Some people questioning whether or not they want to keep doing this as their job. There was a lot of switch-ups during that time in everybody's life. So I don't want to say that, Krafton didn't really look at it in a sympathetic way, but it looks like they didn't. They didn't really care. They didn't want to give him enough time. If I was in charge of Krafton, I would say, listen, you're Glen Schofield. Your work does speak for itself. We don't want you to put out a dud or a game that people are just going to dismiss, like the Callisto Protocol is pretty much dismissed by a lot of people nowadays because of the bad reputation that it has. I don't think it deserves that, but a lot of people just, they hear Callisto Protocol and they immediately give it the thumbs down, give it a lot of crap. And if I was Krafton, I would say, listen, we need to give this guy more time. I know that the financial stuff is at risk. We need to hit these goals for the last quarter of 2022 going into 23. But at the same time, you would have made a lot more impact with sales. You would have moved a lot more product if people heard through the grapevine that this was a solid survival horror masterpiece. This is, and again, it was released around the same time as Dead Space Remake. You did have a little bit of competition. Both didn't sell very well at all, but it was still a little bit of competition. So I would have thought that Krafton, as a, business mindset, would have been like, you know what, let's give this guy enough time. But they weren't really considering that. They weren't considering the lack of people helping him because of rotation of people getting sick. And I think the 3.5-month development time probably would have made them fix the bugs, fix the problems, go in and tweak the stuff that needs to be fixed. And it just didn't happen. And because of that, it failed. I think when it comes to his response here with him being more firm, or should have been more firm in saying that this is going to happen when I say it needs to happen, that's what he should have done. He should have stepped up to the plate and been a leader and said, listen, this is my first IP that I'm trying to make an impression on since my previous work. Dead Space fans and other horror fans alike are waiting for this. We cannot mess this up. We can't. We have to do this right. You know, the pandemic's going on. People are getting sick. He should have had a better pitch to them saying why it has to get moved, or why he physically and mentally can't do it within that time, because there's not enough hands on deck. And I think we would be talking about the Callisto Protocol in a completely different way within the industry, within how fans perceive it, if we had that extra development time. 3.5 months doesn't sound like a lot of time, but believe me, for developing games, that would have been a game changer, because I think a lot of the problems that a lot of people were seeing from day one was going to just be, you know, non-existent, or if there was going to be something that needed to be fixed, maybe it wouldn't have been as bad. Because nowadays we live in an age where everybody reads everything online. People were completely making up their minds just by reading reviews, reading headlines, and that's it. Their mind's made up. They're not going to buy it. They're not going to purchase it. I understand that because games don't come out complete nowadays, people are very hesitant to spend the $75. I completely understand. That is a problem within the industry. These developers do make a lot of money, and a lot of times they put out complete trash. It shouldn't be that way. Reading into this now, I do see this. I see the concern. I know a lot of stuff was out of his hands. I know Glen probably had the best intentions, but if it was your baby, your game, do you want to ship it, you come and take over the studio? He should have said that. Because if you really believe in it and you have your vision, you want to see your vision through, you have to stick up for not only yourself, but everybody that's been developing that thing. Because guess what? They get dragged through the mud too. When they shut your stuff down or fire people because of the, you know, failure of this game, that falls back on you, Glen. As a leader, you should have said, I am not letting this happen. There's people's jobs on the lines, their livelihood is on the line, and instead, it didn't really get addressed. It just kind of got like, yeah, all right, we'll bow down to December 2022, putting it out. And it's like, dude, it could have been a complete 180 if you had that, like, let's say March release date of 2023, or April, let's just say, right? I understand it needs to hit these expectations of these developers. I get it. Or the publishers, rather. Krafton was probably like, all right, come on, like, we need this, because they're anticipating it to sell very well. And then when they saw it wasn't, as it said earlier in this article here, they scaled back those sale projections. And it's just like, dude, you wouldn't have even had to do that if it was like a 9 out of 10, you know, at least, like, had really good potential. Because before I started my live stream, when I was live streaming Callisto day one, I think I streamed it at midnight or whenever it was, right? I immediately got flooded with the chat. Like, people were saying, oh, this game sucks, this game's horrible. And I'm like, I am going into this without any of that. I'm not listening to the outside noise. I'm just going to play it and give you my honest thoughts. And with the day one update even, I think it updated once I beat my first playthrough, and then the second playthrough had an update. I still really enjoyed Callisto. Like, it wasn't like a 10 out of 10, you know, would pay full price for it, but still would really appreciate it as a survival horror fan. You know, even if there was a price drop, even if there was a little bit of, you know, a sale or something like that, right? I wanted to stream it for the channel, so I played it anyway, but I still enjoyed the characters. I love the graphics. I like the story. I did have frame rate issues on the Series X, which was what I was playing it on. But when it was finally fixed, it played very well. And going back and playing it, I don't know. I just think that a lot of people immediately saw the negative press, but sometimes that's all they need to see nowadays. It's a very instant, like, as soon as people see something bad, that's it. As soon as someone sees something good, they're going to buy into it, right? So the negative bubble that was surrounding Callisto definitely didn't help, and I think what's done is done, obviously, but I think Glen should have been a little bit more of a leader in this case. And I know he says it at the end. I know he recognizes that, but now it's too little too late. He says this now because he can probably speak about it at this point, but I feel like he should have been, you know, fighting a little bit harder to make this, like, this is his comeback since Dead Space. And why didn't you fight harder, man? Like, why didn't you fight harder for your team? You didn't fight hard for your vision, yourself. Like, now you're saying this, and, like, I understand. I'm not, like, you know, I'm not blaming you, but I'm blaming you in a certain degree. Like, you have to be held a little bit accountable for how this happened. Obviously, Krafton, yes, they definitely didn't give a crap about anyone being sick. They didn't really care about the pandemic affecting things at that time. So yes, both can be at fault here. So I'll blame Krafton and I'll blame, Schofield for this one. So what are your thoughts on Glenn speaking out about this? Do you think his reasons are valid? Do you think he should have been a little bit more of a leader in this case and stepped up to the plate and said, listen, we're not shipping this thing. We have to make this the best we can. This is my reputation on the line. The developers' livelihoods on the line. You know what I mean? That's how you should look at it, as a project that was supposed to be a very big reintroduction to your survival horror roots, going back all the way from the Dead Space days. So let me know what you think down below. I just thought this would be an interesting video to follow up the last video I made on, which was talking about the dead survival horror IPs. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. We can agree to disagree. It's all good. It's all fun. But don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for more LTRE content.